Hello and welcome to the NIGP webinar, the 5 procurement superpowers shaping the future of public procurement. Today's webinar is being brought to you courtesy of Bonfire. Presenting today is Anthony Berry, Director of Sales. For those of you who have attended NIGP webinars in the past, you know that from time to time, we ask someone from outside NIGP to provide their expertise and unique insight into an important issue we want to highlight to our audience. Across the years, those experts have represented both the public and private sectors, academia, and the nonprofit communities. All webinar content is presented strictly for educational purposes only and is not intended to be an endorsement of our speaker's organization, products, or services. If at any time during the webinar you need tech support, please send me a direct chat. Remember to engage with your peers by making sure you have your chat option selected to everyone. Please submit any questions you have to the Q&A box or the chat, and we'll take them throughout the presentation. Anthony, would you like to go ahead and get us started?
Yeah, sure thing, Justin. Thanks so much for the introduction. And welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in and joining us. I've done a few of these, and I might be familiar to some of you folks here, but I don't know when they started, but I really do like seeing the hellos from all over the, wherever you might be. It's cool to see. So keep those coming. And also throughout the rest of the presentation, feel free to use the chat. If you've been on one of these with me before, I'm going to be talking a lot more than I need to. So share anecdotes, share stories, ask questions, and we'll try to keep this as collaborative as we can, right? Given the dynamic of me talking at you all here. But we have a really cool presentation for you today. It's going to be, as you see, we have some fun slides, but we're going to be diving deep into a lot of the data that we collect here at Bonfire and taking you through some of the key trends that we're seeing in public procurement today and kind of the ways that teams are addressing those trends. And we'll wrap up with some outcomes here. That's me. You can see my face there, or you can look at it in the camera, or if you prefer, and I don't take it personally, just hide my face somewhere else, and you can just listen to me and take a look at the slides as we move through things here. So let's set the agenda for today. We're going to cover what these 5 superpowers of public procurement are, and then we're going to dive into procurement trends, and we'll go into each of these in more detail. And then finally, we'll talk about how these trends and how public procurement has had to react to these trends, some type of the outcomes that you could take from this presentation to apply to your organization. Really, today's presentation, more than anything, is a deep dive into this huge data asset that we have at Bonfire. So, of course, we're supporting public procurement teams, and by supporting those teams, you have access to understand some of their project volumes, project types, things of that nature. So we're hoping that we can take that data in aggregate to give you some insights again and some takeaways so you can apply those to your own organizations. But as you mentioned, or as I mentioned rather, that today we'll be talking about the 5 superpowers of public procurement. And we'll start off here. Not all superheroes wear capes, but for a lot of the folks on the call, I don't know how many of you can raise your hands like, oh yeah, I've really felt like a superhero in doing my job, in public procurement. I think procurement probably more so falls into the category of, taken for granted or underappreciated or something like that. But the truth is, especially in the last few years, procurement has played a critical role in keeping the back office functions moving. And really, procurement has had more opportunity to be the tip of the spear for driving innovation than ever before. So whether you feel like it or not, procurement has never been in a stronger position to be a change agent and to, create real change within your organization and also within your local communities. And that's going to be a lot of what we're talking about today. Just some of the factors that I know we've discussed before, and I'm sure many of you are aware of, some of the reasons why procurement is in this position is because of all the new funding that's being pumped into the government sector. Procurement's really been at the center of managing all those funds and facilitating the ways to make decisions and ensuring that everything's compliant. We've seen a huge uptick in projects as a result of the funds, and just, more increase for responding to demands for, digitization, lacking of human resources, and for procurement to find new ways to engage suppliers, just to name a few things. So there's been this huge wave of we need to address all these different elements. And then on the other side too, we have the stat here. So according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, so 1.2 million government employees left their jobs in the last year or so. So government has not been immune to the Great Resignation, and I'm sure if you look around, some desks might be empty when they used to be full. But that's just putting more and more strain on public procurement teams as well to, again, meet these needs while doing with less resources than almost really ever before. But it's been taking on these new challenges and these new project volumes while facing new or worsening resource constraints that has really showcased those superhero qualities that in the grid of public procurement teams. And really what we're going to be diving into today is a combination of data aggregation, as I mentioned, as well as some anecdotes from agencies who use Bonfire. But we'll be talking about this wave of change and how procurement has really been at the forefront of conducting it. A lot of teams have been rethinking how they collaborate with each other, as well as their internal and even external customers, while looking at ways to leverage technology to reduce some of that strain. I'm just catching up with some of the comments. Victor, that's a good one. Your superhero type is Invisible Man. Is received by non-procurement folk. I think that more so aligns with what I was saying, where procurement's very often invisible or unthanked or not really appreciated. One of my favorite lines that I heard working with the procurement team was, they're like, Anthony, I don't remember the last time they ever built a statue of a procurement person. And I think that kind of encapsulates a lot of what I'm sure people on the line feel just a little bit. But I think part of this presentation too, and we'll get into this, is understanding the value of the work that you do, being able to quantify the value of that work, and be able to use that value to say, hey, like, we deserve this to the table. We can make change. We should be making change. Let's be a little bit less invisible, right? So let's keep moving with the presentation. So there's really 5 procurement superpowers that we've defined here. And we use superpower. You could think this is maybe a loose definition of superpower, but I really don't think it is. In terms of the way that procurement can make a direct and significant impact on their organization or on their community, I don't think there's really 5 more important things than the ones you can see here. So it's vendor diversity, collaboration, digitization, client service, and cost savings. And I'm sure all of you have heard about these in some way, shape, or form, or have experienced some flavor of this over the past few years, or some of them, cost savings, have been around forever, and that's always kind of in the back of everyone's mind. But of course, we're seeing a rise in digitization. We're seeing a rise in procurement's ability to create social equity and be proponents of supporting local business or small business or diverse business. But yeah, these are things and ways that procurement can directly impact their organizations. I know like I said, we're having a lot of fun with the theme here, but when you really think about it, or at least from my perspective, I don't know if there's another department in any organization that has the amount of ability or the amount of impact on these 5 important themes more so than procurement, right? Procurement is inherently such a human function where you're working with vendors, you're working with internal stakeholders, you're working and collaborating with so many different people. And because you're working with so many different people, the reach for change is so significant. But to your comment, Victor, a lot of procurement folks feel invisible or feel underappreciated. So this is one part, again, just realizing the importance of the work that everyone on this call is doing, but also getting takeaways in terms of how you can quantify that work. And again, find ways to push these agenda items more, depending on which one of these superpowers you're most interested in. So what we're going to go over next is primarily a deep dive from this data asset, this data analysis that we've done for 480 public sector organizations, or over 480 public sector organizations, and how they'd be able to action and deploy some of these powers. And again, from my side, I'm going to be talking about our anecdotes, the data that we see. As we get on a topic, I'd encourage you to talk about, hey, we do this at our organization, it's worked well, and related to any one of these categories or related to the ones that I'm speaking about. Again, there's so much knowledge on this call, and there's so much experience on this call as well. I'm happy to share what we can from Bonfire, but there's a lot of value just in raising your hand and typing chat, so don't be afraid to do that. As I mentioned, a lot of the data that we're pulling is from what's called the State of Public Sourcing Report. It's something that we do every single year at Bonfire. And you'll all be sent a copy of this into your email just for attending this webinar for free. But it's a very comprehensive document diving into a lot of data trends that we see. And again, today's discussion will be surfacing some of the data points that can lead to more salient action. And when you want to ask or think about what questions are we looking to answer today, these are the few of the top ones that we've identified, which is how are public agencies using public funds like IIJA or ARPA? What types of projects are agencies prioritizing? Are project volumes increasing? And what are teams doing to handle it? Is vendor diversity and engagement gaining ground? And how are procurement teams leveraging technology to meet new challenges and demands in the public sector? So I think all of these, I'm sure for the folks on the line, one of these questions might be on the forefront of your mind, or you might have some good experience to share. So get ready to type in chat, and I'll be sure to read those answers out to everyone. Okay, let's hop into the first one here. So I think everyone on the call probably feels this to some degree. But again, if you ever wanted to have a quantitative third-party analysis, you are more busy than you were last year. Projects are going up. They've gone up year over year. And from 2021 into 2022, we're actually seeing a 28% increase in project volume. As part of our larger State of the Public Sourcing project, we sent out a survey to our contact database, and one of the main questions we asked was to rate whether you see an increase or decrease in project volumes on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the largest. So 43 respondents rated the influx of projects as a 4 or a 5, and that really closely aligns with the data that we pulled, the objective data from the system, as well as the more subjective data that from the pool that we ran. So let's talk about the types of projects that are coming in the most, right? We've seen a huge jump in construction projects, and I don't think that's a big surprise, just given the kinds of funding that are available. We're seeing a 56% increase in construction projects being ran through Bonfire over 2021. And that tells us that governments are, they're dedicating a lot of time and resources to addressing a lot of the deficiencies in physical infrastructure, or, completing new build projects that are frankly sorely overdue. The next most prevalent type of spend or type of project that we're seeing is our software projects. The past 2 years, of course, has put a lot of strain on legacy systems or manual systems to the point that it's been debilitating for a lot of organizations. So I think as a counter reaction to that, we've seen a lot of teams invest in software, invest in ways to be more digital, even in an office working environment, right? It's like we still need better tools to do the work that we need to do. And it just allows us to be a little bit more risk adverse in the future here. So if your team hasn't seen, an increase of these type of projects, chances are is that it's coming. So being prepared for those type of complexities for, big software projects, or more specifically, because there's a lot of nuances to construction procurement, and making sure you have resources on your team to manage that is definitely a good thing that you can keep in the back of your mind, just to, save your team a lot of time and stress. What we've seen teams doing in some sectors specifically, because we know there's an influx of spend for construction, let's meet with those internal customers. We can create a long-term strategy map for what they might want to get done. If funding, if they were to access all those funds, and just allocate and map what type of resources procurement can provide. So just by creating that mutual plan together, you can just set a more clear expectation. And again, make sure that you're putting your team, the procurement team, in a position to be successful with the demands of some of these other customers. There's a lot of other things that teams are doing to prepare for these type of projects, freshening up templates or legal language that you might have. If you're accessing some of these funds, that's federal money. So thinking about what the reporting requirements need to be for that, and making sure that you have systems set up to capture those data points and be able to, again, validate the grant money that you'll be leveraging. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to be more prepared about this, but those are the 2 types of projects that we're specifically seeing, in addition to just seeing, a big jump in projects overall. I mentioned this just a bit, or I teased it, but there are definitely 2 verticals that we're seeing, and it makes sense, right? We're seeing a significant jump in project volume for transportation agencies, as well as for utilities agencies, 33% and 13% respectively. But yeah, and just for context, I say transportation, but that could be, there's a lot of municipalities that manage their rail or their airports or whatever that might be. So those organizations are included in that stat as well. But specifically in these type of sectors where we're seeing the largest influx in project volume, because I think they're most directly involved with capital improvement or construction projects, things of that nature. Moving on to the next one here. We do have a poll. which we can go ahead and launch. And the question is, are you seeing an increase in projects related to infrastructure funding? So ARPA, IIJA, et cetera. So go ahead and throw your answer in chat, and I'll take a look at what's going on in the chat here. No demands of me yet, and no personal anecdotes, but I am happy to see that people like the slides.
Getting close to 70% participation, so we'll give everyone about 5 more seconds to get the response in. And Anthony, here are results.
All right. So the results are 17% of the folks on the line are saying, no, not really. We're not seeing an increase in that. 44% are saying somewhat, but not overwhelming. 22% are saying yes, more projects than we can handle. And then 17% are saying not sure. So it's really these two middle options, which are saying, yes, we're seeing an increase. And that actually translates with some quick mental math to 66%, or about 2/3 of the audience are saying, yeah, we're seeing an increase in projects because of these funds. It might not be something that's unbearable or overwhelming, but we are seeing an increase. And so about 25%, or almost a quarter of the folks on the line, are saying we are at a point where we don't have the resources to manage the increase in the volume of projects that we're seeing. And again, for the folks who are saying not really, you're not sure, it might just be a matter of whether it's coming. For a lot of these type of grant funds, there often is a little bit of latency in the organization in terms of whether they're coming in, or whether that money is going to hit the respective teams and they can start prioritizing things. There's also, of course, a chance that you guys might just be working in verticals or might not have access to that much funds. But with the majority of folks on the line saying yes, we are seeing that increase. It for what it's worth, that's what we've been seeing across the market as a whole. Of course, it's happening in different phases. So I think it's something at least to be cognizant of if you're falling into the not really camp or the not sure camp. I'm going to take a look at some of the comments here before I move on to the next slide. So Dom asked a question. He said, what was the percent increase of software again? Let me pull that up for you here. Bear with me. I think it was 28%. Oh, no, sorry. 36% increase in software purchases. This is what we've seen from the data that we pulled. And that's compared historically, of course. And then the other thing I wanted to call out too is Casey mentioned something from City of Little Rock, seeing a large influx of construction and capital improvement projects per funding, as we discussed. Yeah, so that's good to see. And that makes sense, right? A large metropolitan city will be leveraging those funds as much as possible. But thanks for sharing, Casey. Let's hop over to the next slide here, which is all about building stronger vendor alliances. And I think there was a lot of teams who, we heard a lot of really cool anecdotes that came out of building stronger vendor alliances, especially coming out of responding to COVID, right? Where there was a supply chain issue, the supplier market was crazy, and you needed to reach out and build these connections to, find suppliers who could support your organization. And I think while the motion is different, I think there's a lot of that has maintained, where we've seen a lot of teams really drive a lot of value out of being more intentional about interacting with their local supplier community. And of course, some of that is just being driven out of necessity we want to work with as many local and as competitive suppliers as possible. So I'm going to network with my community and I'm going to let them make sure that they know about the projects that I'm running. But we're also seeing this other trend happening where, because of federal funds or because of whatever reason, we need to be able to engage with, our DBE status, our SWAM, our SWIMB, our hub, whatever you want to call it. Just engaging with local or disadvantaged suppliers has become more and more important. So we have a few stats here that I'll go ahead and walk us through. All agencies are trying to get more vendors, of course, and it's great for competition and getting the most bang for taxpayer buck. But what's been really interesting is that we've seen the number of proposals submitted per project actually take a 7% dip. So we're seeing teams are sending out more invites and they're connecting with more suppliers, but then the percent of, the way that's translating to submissions has actually gone down. And that dip could mean a few things, right? Maybe some vendors have not completely bounced back from the pandemic yet. So there's fewer options in the vendor pool overall. Maybe some vendors are overwhelmed with other government contracts because, again, I think there is a surplus of contracts that are, even if you only work with public sector, like public sector construction projects, there's way more jobs. So maybe there's less capacity for the suppliers that are in your area to actually take on those jobs. Or it could be something, more simple, like the RFPs are too complex, unclear, they don't align with certain vendors. But whatever the reason is, teams are trying to broaden their vendor pool, which is evidenced by just the sheer amount of invitations that are being sent out. So there's a really natural and logical train of thought that says, yeah, the more vendors that I connect with, the more participation that I'm going to get. But actually what we saw, this tip here in the orange, is the ideal number of suppliers to invite into a project was actually 35. So once you got beyond 35, there was like a steep drop off. There was diminishing returns in the amount of submissions you got. So even if I can use, an e-procurement system to match with 1,000 suppliers, or if I'm spending all this time, doing research on Google and I'm finding lists of hundreds and hundreds of suppliers, the sweet spot that we saw where beyond 35 invites, there wasn't much of an increase in participation, was 35. And of course, that's not a small amount of suppliers, right? Especially if you don't have any tools to dive into like a commodity code system. But it's just something to keep in the back of your mind as well. Finding suppliers who are more specialized to a specific commodity code, or who are in your local area who do the job, and creating a more custom curated message to them. I think that's what's going to create a stronger return on your invites and the connections with vendors, versus, again, playing the numbers game and sending out an invite to however many hundreds or thousands of suppliers we can in a commodity code system. I think the other question that a lot of teams might have is, how do we actually choose those 35 vendors? And of course, it depends, but we're going to give some recommendations. It depends on what your team's goals are. If you're more focused on getting the highest quality goods or services, then looking at vendors with specific certifications, awards, or years in business can help you vet that list. What we've seen too is teams are running more of like an RFI type project, where we're going to blast that out to thousands of vendors or hundreds of vendors. From there, we'll get X% of those who respond. And of the folks who respond and actually meet the qualifications for the RFI, we'll invite them back to an RFP. So we're still meeting the qualifications for, of course, advertising this publicly. But then when it comes to doing the actual evaluation of that project, we don't have to go ahead and evaluate 50 different submissions. We can evaluate 10 submissions from the suppliers who we know meet our requirements the best, based on the RFI that we put out, or the request for qualifications rather. And again, I mentioned this already, but if your priorities lie with supporting local communities, it's always a good idea to create a list or create a database of internal or local suppliers. If you're using any type of vendor management system, you'll be able to sort suppliers by their zip code or what city they're in, or whatever it is that you're collecting. So even you can start by working with local suppliers and prioritizing that outreach first and foremost. Yeah, a few stats here on building stronger vendor alliances. And again, the trend that we're seeing here, the takeaway from all this is, I think there is definitely a big push, and teams are still pushing for this, mind you, of we have to get it into a commodity code system. We have to match it with as many vendors as possible. That's the way to maximize our competition. That's true to some extent, but again, there's diminishing returns pretty quickly. So it's really more so about doing that research, building those relationships, and a little bit more of a boots on the ground effort to engage with local suppliers and making sure that they are a good fit for the job that you want to do. Checking chat here, and I'll give everyone a second to type in anecdotes about what they're doing for this, or if they've had any experience, or just want to give me a thumbs up. But Dom has a question. He says, is the transportation utility percent increase separate from the 56% of construction, or is it part of the 56? I believe it's the same, but I will get back to you on that because I don't know off the top of my head. It'll be in the report that we send out, but let me make a note on the piece of paper I don't have by me, so people in the camera can see me frantically searching around. But I'll send you a note there, Dom. Christina typed in a chat and she said, we'd love to work with more local suppliers, but our hands are tied with accepting the lowest bid submitted. Yeah, that's tough, right? And I think that goes back to the organization priorities. At the end of the day, ideally, we want to work with more local suppliers, but again, we can't sacrifice the business goals in order to do that. And if the goals are we need to save as much money as possible, there's no way to go around that, right? But what I do think might be worth is for local vendors too, if they're submitting bid over bid and they're getting frustrated that their price isn't the lowest, having a discussion about like what the market is, and I'm sure maybe they are or are not asking for those bid submissions so we can get a sense of where the price are, but there might be some potential for like, again, just reaching that handout and having a connection with those suppliers. Of course, not during the formal process or anything like that, but outside of that context, just as a way to engage with your local supplier community. Casey mentioned from Little Rock, if my memory serves me correct, we're regularly engaging our vendors through events, getting them set up, town hall events where they voice concerns or complaints, but we still are getting low response rates. And I believe your aforementioned statement on bids that are too complex may be hindering us. Yeah, low response rates are the same vendors regularly. Thank you for bringing light to complexity of the issue. Yeah, yeah, absolutely, Casey. And I think, I think because of the fundings that's coming in, there's like, there are abnormal projects that are being pushed out to the market that are maybe, let's say, outside of the typical project. Another thing that we've seen be really helpful, and this is something that Bonfire helps teams do. Oftentimes jobs might be too big for local contractors or for a contractor, but thinking about how can we use technology, or even without technology, how can we better connect our subcontractors to our primes? Because again, even though we might not be diverse in the primes that we work with, or a job might be too big for one contractor to take on, but is there a way that we might be able to connect subs to primes? Is a way to, one, have a more diverse vendor or group of vendors who get that award, but then also by having that group of vendors, they might actually be able to accomplish the job that we're putting up to the market. Definitely not a small task at all, but something to think about potentially as well. Let's move on down here to the next slide, which is speaking to vendor diversity. So I'm sure most teams are feeling this too, but vendor diversity is an increasingly important topic, especially in public sector. With most public procurement teams we're seeing are making it a priority, or it's something that is at least being formulated, at some level of the government. Many organizations are starting to take interest in supplier diversity. Of course, a big reason too is, some state and all federal funding requires the inclusion of disadvantaged business enterprises and being able to report on that as well, right, to justify that grant when an audit comes. So just to share some anecdotes, though, we have heard a lot of our customers about the benefits they're seeing just by engaging with small and diverse suppliers. These clients, the agencies who are doing this intentional about this type of outreach, are seeing more competition in their vendor pools, which is leading to better bang for the buck. They're getting the value and showing sound stewardship of public funds. It does wonders to gain back some of this idea of public trust that may have been lost over the last few years. And some clients are saying that creating diversity initiatives have helped them in attracting and retaining talent in the midst of the Great Resignation. So I think just, again, aligning organizational values with what employee values might be, it's just, it's more exciting to work for an agency where you feel like you're making a difference in your local community, just to have people have more emotional investment in the work that they're doing. Which are three benefits, but maybe not the first things that would come to mind thinking like, oh yeah, we need to launch our DBE program. But it is making a difference. That being said, there are, of course, a number of organizations that are leading the charge. And what we actually gathered here is information on what types of our customers were actually using Bonfire to identify and track DBE. And really the two main ones were transportation and education. Those type of organizations were most predominantly tracking DBE statuses. But we are seeing more and more clients make supplier diversity a priority for their organization, and the data we have reflects that. It's been a slow but definitely a steady climb in these type of initiatives. So teams are trying to find ways to make it easier for DBEs to submit proposals, make it easier for them to work and engage with the procurement team. And we'll share a few tips that can actually help you kickstart a DBE initiative if that's something that you're thinking about. If it's the actual process of identifying DBEs that's holding you back from diving in, Having a way for them to self-identify, like through vendor self-service, would be a great way to, tag them, and then you can go ahead and vet them against whatever criteria you set up. And we're talking a lot about these superpowers, but I think this one in particular is a big one. The other ones are mostly organizational benefits, of course, but this one specifically, whether you're connecting with local business or disadvantaged business or whatever it is, procurement really does have the ability to make a direct impact on their local economy just by being more intentional about engaging with local suppliers and with disadvantaged suppliers. And again, at the end of the day, for a lot of these projects, lowest bid will win, and nothing will change that. But it's just being intentional about that outreach and being intentional about education that can and will make a difference. We profiled Sheena here, who's the contract and compliance officer at the city of Akron in Ohio. So she was responsible for standing up and launching the DBE program in Akron. So here are the 4 tips that Sheena shares, and hopefully this will create some actionable takeaways for the folks on the line. So she says, know your ecosystem. So get to know and target business owners, build relationships, and learn how they fit into your supplier ecosystem. If you're using any type of tool, help them onboard into that tool, let them know about what type of projects might be coming up. And again, just be intentional about networking and connecting with, again, your local ecosystem. Step 2 is educate. So educate internal stakeholders and socialize the importance of the benefits of supplier diversity. Not just externally out to the market, of course, but internally to your internal customers, and let them know why this is important and the benefits for the organization as a whole. This third one's a pretty key one, which is define metrics for success. It's one thing to say, yes, we want to do this thing, and maybe we start tracking some DBE, but if you're not working up against a target, or if you don't have a good system to track the participation or track the success of the initiative, then it's going to be very difficult to, again, quantify the impact that you're making on your organization. And the 4th tip is probably the most powerful one. There's a million things to think about and a million different ways to do it, but just start. It is Sheena's recommendation here. Start by having some conversations. Start by reaching out and sending some emails to local businesses, right? Just it's hard to balance with everything else that's going on, but even a little bit can just get you going somewhere, even if you can't take on all 3 of these tips, right off the bat. I'm taking a look at some of the comments here. So Atlanta's municipality has implemented micro purchase for anything under 5K. 3 quotes are not needed. This helps with more vendor inclusiveness and diversity. Yeah, that's a great initiative, right? It's if you can have a threshold where you can work, where under a certain threshold you can work with a local supplier or a disadvantaged supplier. That's definitely something that could be a way to incentivize working with those type of businesses, and it'll allow you to categorize spend. Even if it is tail spend for a micro purchase or something on a P card or something, you'll still be spend that's categorized under a DBE supplier. Lynn mentioned supplier diversity is important for us in Multnomah County, Oregon. 25% of our RFP points are for this. Wow. And I think that's a great practice, right? That's very much putting the money or your money where your mouth is. 25% of an RFP or 25% of any decision being incentivized towards supplier diversity. That will encourage the idea of, if I'm a prime and I don't hit that status, even I would want to go out and find subcontractors who can help me hit those initiatives, so I can get that 25% of an RFP, because that is a significant piece of that award. Victor says Sheena needs a superhero theme song. Victor, I'm assuming that you'll start composing that immediately following this webinar. We'll follow up on that. And Vadim said, the New York City government, we have a threshold of up to 20K for micro purchases and up to 35K for construction related micro purchases. And that sounds similar to what Adrian mentioned from Atlanta, that I'm assuming those micro purchases allow you to work with those local suppliers at will. And again, especially for some of the tail spend, like, maybe 20K or 35K, that might be, of course, you're near New York City, but that might be higher than a lot of other municipalities or other organizations. But, that tail spend, there's probably not too much variance in those commodity prices anyway. So there might be a way to set up a micro purchase or a P card limit where you could work with those disadvantaged suppliers and be, again, more intentional about working with local community and those type of purchases. Thanks for the comments, everyone. So we have a poll. And that poll is, How would you best describe your vendor diversity strategy today? And the options are: we have established strategy with clear goals and a plan. Option 2 is vendor diversity is an emerging priority. Option 3 is we believe vendor diversity is important, but we don't have established goals and strategies. And option 4 is it's not a priority at the organization today. So we'll give you some time to click the box, and feel free to share more stories through chat if you like.
Right, about 60% participated, so we'll give everyone about 5 more seconds. And here results.
Great. Okay. Wow. Pretty even split. Genuinely an even split across the top 3. So 31%, or let's say a third of people say we have an established strategy with clear goals and a plan to meet it. 30 or a third say, yeah, vendor diversity is an emerging priority and we plan to establish clear goals and strategies in the future. And the third say, yeah, vendor diversity is important, but we don't have established goals and strategies, with 6% saying it's just not a priority for our organization at the moment. So for the 10 people who said it's not a priority, I'm sure you can see this by the poll. It is coming. It's something that will become more top of mind, and it's, because it has been coming, and we're seeing this take shape, and we're seeing it be something that's actionable for organizations. But yeah, it's interesting to see the essentially even split, 49, 49, and 49 across the top 3. Great. So let's hop into the next slide here. So every superhero needs a trusted sidekick, right? And for a lot of procurement teams, that is procurement technology, whether it's Bonfire or a different system. These tools are great in terms of getting away from manual work and helping teams do more with less, especially in an environment where it's harder to have human resources to help you out. Technology can be a quick fix. What we're seeing, just for what it's worth, a 7% increase in e-procurement logins per organization. So there has been a greater adoption of technology. And what's been really interesting too is there's been a greater adoption across different stakeholders as well. So collaboration has really been at the forefront of how procurement, and collaboration is nothing new, right? Procurement has inherently had to work with all different types of stakeholders, vendors, and departments in all different ways. But what we're seeing is a greater adoption of digital tools to facilitate that collaboration. Versus even when Bonfire first started off, we heard a lot about procurement teams. They come into the system, they do the work, and a lot of the other communication and chatting and collaboration happen outside of the system. But there's been a big push to how can we do more of this in the platform, and how can we use a procurement technology suite to be the central nervous system of how procurement connects with all these different organizations. Just to pull out some other objective data here, third-party data that isn't from Bonfire. So CompTIA surveyed city and county CIOs earlier this year. Streamlining procurement systems and processes was among the top 10 CIO priorities for the next 2 years. So for what it's worth, of course, this has always been a procurement issue and a procurement initiative to stand tools up. I think other organizations are starting to realize the importance and the leverage that they can get by giving procurement teams better tools. So in the grand scheme of procurement's doing amazing work, you should feel comfortable about talking that work to get the tools that you need. The CIO might be a friendly resource, in your organization, who might be able to recognize that, yeah, this is something that needs addressing. So maybe with a note, if you're sitting there thinking like, oh yeah, e-procurement, wouldn't that be nice? No, there's might be a more friends in your organization than you think. Moving on to the next slide here, we do have another poll, which is your organization using any type of e-procurement technology? It might be best of breed, might be ERP, might be centralized digital document storage, like a SharePoint or any type of storage. And the last one's not sure. So go ahead and fill that out, and we'll see where folks are in terms of the adoption of procurement technology today.
So we'll give everyone 5 more seconds. And here are results.
Great, thanks. So we can see, actually, the results are a bit surprising to me. So only 7% of organizations say they have a best-in-breed procurement technology solution. The vast majority of teams, and by vast majority, I mean 56% of teams who respond to this are saying that they're relying on their ERP system for e-procurement technology. And then some teams are using like a SharePoint system or some type of internal document management system, and 14% are not sure, which maybe just means that they don't fall into any of these buckets. It's interesting too on the ERP side of things. I think because most organizations, or let's say all organizations, have some type of ERP system, and very often those type of systems have procurement technology included. It's tricky because it's great for payments, it's great for invoicing and cutting POs and that type of thing, but when it comes to facilitating like a sourcing event or even sometimes managing contracts, those systems are very rarely purpose built. So having an ERP system and checking that box is better than nothing for sure, but oftentimes we're still seeing the need for teams to get more specialized in their tool set. Just taking a look at the questions here. Crystal asked a question who says, what would you say to those where vendor diversity is not a priority? What advantages are there in implementing a vendor diversity program when low cost is typically the determining factor? I mean, there's a few things that I would say. I think procurement's ability to encourage social good is like a key thing. But even some of the other points that were mentioned on the slide deck, the point about, if you're having trouble retaining employees or hiring employees, like people want to work for an organization that is trying to do some social good. And I think the other thing too is like, just because a vendor is diverse, that doesn't mean they're going to be the lowest cost. So, being intentional about engaging those type of suppliers where they might feel like, why would I compete in a government contract? I'm not going to get it. There's still a high potential for being reaching out to diverse vendors or local vendors will in fact give us that lower cost, while also allowing to do the social good. Hopefully that's helpful, Crystal. And if not, there's some information in the document that we'll send in some in the slides. And then Diane and Fute, hopefully I pronounced that right, say, what is best of breed? When we say best of breed, that might actually just be specific software language, but we mean like more so it's like a bolt-on tool that's specifically for, let's say, like commodity code matching or e-procurement, or doing e-sourcing, contract management, something that is like a tool built for procurement folks and specialized for procurement folks. Versus an ERP system, in contrast, is much more broad, has a bunch of different modules. They're all kind of built to service different people, but it's a really broad tool that tries to do everything. And sometimes because it tries to do everything, it doesn't do everything exactly best as possible. Yeah, Bonfire is one example of a best in breed procurement tool, but of course there's others as well. Let's move on to the next slide here, which is all about client service. And a cool data point that we've been able to surface is how much time it takes for a request, so an initial customer request, to come into a system, and for that to actually go ahead and translate it and turn into a live project that has approvals, right? So maybe there's a rec number, maybe that's approved, but it's typically about 14 days from the time a project comes in to a time when that project can actually be launched and worked on further, or actually be pushed out to something that hits the market. So of course, in that time, in that 14 days, there's a lot that's going on. Purchasing managers are gathering requirements. They're following up with stakeholders to solidify details, verify budgets, and of course research different templates and peer benchmarks to set expectations. But creating an efficient RFP creation process is vital to managing a high volume of project requests. I think it's just thinking about this throughput. If we were spending 14 days here, and which is maybe longer than we'd like, and then we're also spending an extra week there, the time will add up. In an environment where teams are often feel like they are a little bit overwhelmed with the amount of projects they're trying to take on, being able to save a month or being able to save a month and a half on a project could really add up to actually take on an additional full project in theory, right? A major way that teams are streamlining their processes today is through a more formalized intake process. So for a lot of teams, we hear about maybe requests are coming in through an email, or requests might be coming in through a phone call. It's difficult to manage things that way because they might fall through the cracks, or they might be standardized or managed. So thinking about a tool that can support receiving those requests, triaging those requests, that's made a lot of difference for teams to tighten up those, reducing this time from when a request comes in to when a project is actually launched. Speaking of projects, we also have a breakdown of the most common project types, that have been ran by procurement teams. And really the most common ones, taking a look here, we can see that it's primarily construction and then primarily professional services. And of course, professional services is a pretty broad category. But that's just the way that we grouped it to make the data make sense. IT software here has the bronze medal, which, I think a lot of us are feeling, but it's really these three categories that we're seeing the most requests come in to say, yeah, this is a project that we need to run, and something that we need to go ahead and action. If your team sees a lot of requests for these categories, it's probably worthwhile for you to create, some way to formalize getting that information, because even thinking about these different contract types, there's different information you might need to capture on each of them. There's different data you might need to collect. So, for the predominant examples that we're getting, how do I make sure that we're getting the information that we need from our internal customers, so we can maybe cut down on some of that back and forth initially and have the data we need from that initial request coming through. With decreasing resources, teams are putting more and more emphasis on planning for what's coming around the corner. So it's become really necessary to set expectations with those internal customers, prioritize requests, and make sure that things are on track. And I think also understanding these projects as they're submitted in, that's been a huge boon for a lot of teams in terms of, again, understanding what's coming around the corner and just being able to resource plan. If I know that my team who has specialty and usually works with construction is swamped, but I have a few projects that are construction based that have come in, I have the business decision to make for, can I have someone else work that project, or do I need to go back to the customer and just to set that expectation, or have a conversation with them about what projects should be prioritized, just given the reality of our, most procurement teams' resource situation right now. But again, just something else to think about, right? When, in terms of how can I try to stay ahead of this as much as I possibly can, and what types of measures are teams taking given the current resourcing environment that, again, teams are facing. Hopping into the next slide here, also on the vein of collaboration, we all know that approvals are an essential part of the RFP or bid creation process, but they can still be time consuming, especially because we send something off, or we send an email off and we say, great, this is completely in someone else's hands. I hope they get back to me in a timely fashion. And sometimes they will, and sometimes they won't. Sometimes we're waiting days or weeks or maybe even longer just for stakeholders to send back that approval at various stages of a process. There's this idea of an approval black hole that takes place when you send an approval out manually to a stakeholder over email, and it just gets lost, right? It's something that is maybe read, wasn't actioned immediately, and it's something that is, might as well have never been sent at all, because that person won't be on top of mind for them to action it. So what we found is that creating an efficient approval workflows does relate in getting more responses to those approval requests, especially on getting them back, in a more timely fashion more often. That's made a big difference, is, again, having a more formalized way to facilitate some of this work as well. Again, this all kind of feeds into this overall need that we're seeing, which is procurements, the breadth of what they're digitizing is becoming wider, which is inherently involving more stakeholders, which is actually finding a lot of teams new ways to actually save time in ways that they weren't thinking about before. And managing approvals through a system could be certainly a way to save some time as well. And again, just make it where you can set this process up, forget about it, and then a system might take care of the rest. The last thing that we're going to talk about here is community impact. And there's two communities, right? There's your inner organization community and the broader community. And two stats that we pulled that we thought were pretty neat is, by average, for teams who are running an RFP or a bid, they're saving 9.5% compared to historical spend, or compared to estimated spend. So they, procurement teams are saving money for their organizations. And this fact is a bit more of a fun one, but this is specifically for teams who, of course, digitize their process, but you have the opportunity to save a lot of paper. For organizations using Bonfire specifically, we saved 156 million pages of paper, which is a lot of trees potentially. And of course, Bonfire is just one system. You got to think there's other systems out there, and they're all providing that same type of benefit as well. For when you're not getting paper submissions, but rather getting digital submissions as well. And procurement is very traditionally been a department that has relied a whole lot on paper. And we, in the early days of Bonfire, I remember talking to agencies who were like, yeah, we need a way to get electronic submissions because we're running out of physical space to store these paper records. We need to find a way to digitize it. But it's by replacing these paper-based processes that vendor submissions, evaluation scorecards, whatever it is, that you can make a difference in the environment, and of course be much more efficient as well. I think a lot of teams have, as much as possible, moved away from paper submissions, even moving towards email submissions or things of that nature. But just more of a fun stat to quantify again the good that procurement can do and what that reach for impact looks like. Let's dive a bit more into cost savings here. So we actually have cost savings broken down by sector as well. And again, these are compared to historical prices or projected prices. And it's pretty interesting where healthcare organizations actually, by a pretty significant margin, saw the most amount of savings from what we saw. But still, most other organizations and most of the verticals, they're really hitting around the 10% mark, give or take a few percentage points. Well, the specific average cost savings of e-procurement varies by organizations. Again, the average which we saw before was that 9.5% saving. So that's kind of the number. If you want to use something more general, that's one you can use, or if your vertical has a higher number, you could use this. But that's just the data that we've quantified through what we can see in Bonfire. So e-procurement makes it easier to, of course, engage a broader vendor pool, which allows you to move towards more cost savings. But it also makes it easier for those vendors to respond to your project. So just to share a little bit more information, this is kind of tying in cost saving with vendor participation. Projects that only had like a single vendor who submitted in, there was still cost savings, but it was a much lower percent. But for projects with 4 or more vendors who submitted, they typically saw much closer to this 10% compared to just like, under 5% when one vendor submitted. So again, participation is the most reliable lever that we can pull in order to create cost savings. And again, the way to create proper vendor participation is with more thoughtful, independent research of reaching out to not hundreds of accounts, but let's say dozens of accounts to find suppliers who meet that portfolio and build that relationship so they will actually put in their response. So we have a comment here, an anecdote from Joe Lopez, who's at Community Asset Builders, which is a nonprofit focused consulting firm. He mentioned that he was able to save one of his client agencies over $1 million last year through the use of e-procurement. So just a good story to hear from someone who's out there working in the trenches, so to speak, and doing the job. So to wrap up here, as we get into the last 7 minutes of our time together, there was a lot of things that we talked about, but I think just to recap, the environment is, or to set the stage, right? There's all these environmental factors. There's new funding that's flooding in. Procurement teams are busier than ever, but there's also more projects than ever before. There's lots of new challenges popping up, and procurement teams are specifically tasked with managing things like vendor diversity. They're trying to engage with local supplier communities. And what I thought I'd share is just some of the potential outcomes out of this presentation. Again, I've been talking a lot, sorry, but I think there are some actual points here. And I kind of broke it down into 5 salient points, and I'm just going to read them here from my notes. So the first one is take the data that Bonfire has shared on project volumes going up, but also quantify your own project volume, right? For a lot of teams, it's difficult to have access to that type of data quickly. If you have a system, great, you can run a report really quickly. If you don't, I do think it's worth counting the projects, like counting the documents you put together and your team has put together, so you can understand and show to whoever you need to that, hey, my team is busier than they've ever been. We're seeing this on aggregate across all of the US, We're seeing this in our organization. We need some help or we need something, right? But the reality is it's a tough time for procurement teams who are asked to do so much. So quantify your increasing workload. Point number 2, there's more and more construction projects coming. Be intentional about working with those specific departments who might be putting in this request. Understand what might be coming around the corner. Be transparent and clear about the resources that you have. And this way you can have a mutual plan that you both agree with, so you can make sure that you're managing and prioritizing the projects that those internal customers want you to work on and focus on. Point 3, 35 vendor invites. From what we see, that's the sweet spot. Find 35 suppliers who are highly relevant. Find 35 suppliers in your local community. Send a personalized note, make a connection. That's the way to maximize vendor participation, is with more, not by through volume necessarily, but through finding relevant suppliers and making sure that they are aware what the product is and building that relationship. Point number 4 is, if you have a DB initiative, or for the folks who haven't had one yet or are thinking about it, let's take Sheena's point number 4. Just start engaging with local suppliers, start reaching out to local businesses, do some boots on the ground effort. Again, it'll take time, but if you can commit to finding a new organization a week or once a month, that's still better than nothing, right? And you can start to gain some steam and understand your local suppliers community a little bit better. And then my last point is, feel proud about the work that you do, right? Feel proud about the impact that procurement can have at your organization. I feel proud about the work that the impact that procurement can have on your local community. Procurement is a thankless job, right? And I think everyone on the line here knows that. So if nothing else, take a little bit of time to pat yourself on the back, thank yourself. But procurement's being asked to do a lot. And we use the term superhero. It's a little bit of a play, but I think there's more truth to it than not, where there's so much good that can be done through your function. And again, feel proud about that work that you're doing. Yeah, we'll end it on that note. We are sending out this digital copy of the 2022 State of Public Sourcing Report. There is all the data points we talked about today and much, much more. So you'll be able to dive into that. And of course, we're going to be at Forum. Come by, say hello to us. We're at booth 918. We have a raffle. I think there's going to be some people at our booth wearing capes. So if you want to see a grown man or a grown woman wearing a superhero costume, 918 is the best place to do that. I'm going to go ahead and check comments here and questions, and we can keep the discussion going. But yeah, thanks so much for the time. Let's see what people are saying here. Dom says, is Bonfire a product for government only, or both commercial and government? Bonfire is built for government agencies, but we do have some commercial agencies who use it just because because it's good software, even if it's not built for them. Like, think about someone who's like in the energy business or in any type of business where there's a lot of regulation. They're probably operate a bit closer to public sector than to like a marketing company or something like that. So they really find a lot of value in running those formal RFPs. So we do have some commercial agencies. Diane says, the biggest challenge in changing the vendor community's mindset, who are used to paper bids, submittals, is to use the electronic process instead. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Because we hear that a bit too, right? I think education is probably the biggest thing about that. And I think, building those relationships. I think it's very easy for a vendor to say like, oh yeah, we don't want to do this. We're going to do things the same way. We want to drive it in. We want to see who else is in the parking lot. But again, I think just being intentional about networking with those local suppliers and understanding why they don't want to use that submission process and educating them on a digital process if you have one in place. That'd be my recommendation. I know it's hard because it's a much bigger conversation, and I'm also cognizant of time here, but yeah, I have a lot more thoughts on that, and maybe I'll send you a note too, which you can feel free to ignore or get back to me, but happy to chat more about it. Yeah, Melanie mentioned that vendors have easily transferred over. And that's the thing. I'm not sure if the city has or hasn't adopted anything, but from what we can say from our experience is there's always resistance because they're humans and there's a natural resistance to change. But once they have it, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, this is easy and I'm just going to do this now. For what it's worth. Veronica said that she agrees with you, Diane. So also facing that type of difficulty with vendors who are really set on a paper submission process. Nice, Victor. I'm glad to see you're ordering your cape. So there'll be at least 2 people wearing a cape at Forum. That's good to hear. And it looks like, nice, Barbara, got your next Halloween costume idea. Perfect, perfect. And I think everything else is thank yous. Okay. So thank you for the thank yous and thank you for your time. We'll wrap it up there. Keep an eye open on that State of Public Sourcing report, which will have all this data. And again, come on our website and make sure you come see us at 918. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Anthony, and our audience for their participation. Please take time to fill out the evaluation survey. Once we end the webinar, you'll receive a prompt to take that. Both the recording and survey links will also be emailed to you later this afternoon. Thanks again and have a great day.